So again, welcome. This session is titled Empowering English Learners, a CS4EL Program Overview. First, allow us to introduce ourselves. My name is Devin Morano. I'm based out of San Diego. And so I work two different roles. I was a high school teacher for 10 years. This is my first year out of the classroom. I work as the lead facilitator on the project, and that position is through CSTA. My other position is out of my local district as a computer science resource teacher.
And I'm Lauren Curry. I am in Las Cruces, New Mexico. I am also a computer science teacher, and you will hear in the background some bells going off. I am currently getting ready to have some students, so they know what to do. They're going to be kind of working away. And I am also a facilitator for the CSforEL project through CSTA.
So Lauren and I have been working together for like almost 4 years now. We joined the CS4EL program under cohort A back in the 21-22 school year. And then at the end of the program, we just found so much value in the strategies and just the support network that it opened up that we joined on as facilitators. And so it's been kind of a really cool journey for us. And we're excited that we get these types of opportunities to like talk about the program to other people because we are both just very passionate about advocating for equity within our instructional practices. Of course, we'll talk a little bit about enrollment and recruitment and getting those students in your door and getting those underrepresented populations enrolled within these CS classes. But then what? What are we doing to support those teachers beyond just access? So what is CS4EL? So CS4EL, Computer Science for English Learners, it's a professional development program focused on creating awareness and support. So it's kind of like two big pillars for supporting English learners, multilingual learners, whatever your local district or state refers to those students who are just not classified as fluent in English. And so the program provides, like I said, two main interventions, one of which is a school leadership network that involves kind of a team of stakeholders, which are like counselors and administrators and the computer science teacher representing their school site. But then the other half of the project is teacher professional development, which if you are a classroom teacher, you know there's not a lot of, state by state, there's a great deal of variability in how much training and preparation CS teachers have access to. And so our program provides a set of strategies that are designed specifically with computer science in mind. And then there's also just kind of this natural, really beautiful opportunity to collaborate and get feedback from these other CS teachers, because we know one of the other challenges that we face in the classroom is kind of our singleton nature. A lot of times we are the only computer science teacher in our entire campus, sometimes in your entire district. And so the program really pulls these teachers together for this community of practice. Yes, we are islands. So we are an EIR funded program, and our program outcomes are focused on system, school, and teacher capacity, specifically in the AP Computer Science Principles course. And that kind of just comes down to like program and grant requirements. But we like to think of our instructional strategies and a lot of the tools that come out of our program as like universal K through 12, things that all teachers and like CS advocates can benefit from. But when we think about our specific program outcomes, we have four main goals: increased enrollment for AP Computer Science principles among English learners, increased engagement and grades for those English learners, increased achievement on the exam, so that would be a qualifying score, and increased language proficiency. So again, the focus over there on kind of like our formal program outcomes does focus on that one AP Computer Science Principles course, but we believe, Lauren, myself, and the entire team over at CSTA, that these strategies really do transcend any one specific course or role. The words that come to mind as we walk you through this overview and some of the strategies that our teacher participants experience, the big two are intentional and authentic. And so when it comes down to the program and all of the different components that the teachers have access to, when we're thinking about supporting English learners, we want to provide them with regular opportunities to talk and work together. And that sounds really simple from like a teacher perspective. Like, of course, we want our students to talk. Of course, we want them to work together. But it's the way that we go about structuring those interactions and the intentionality behind them that is really going to provide specific supports for their disciplinary knowledge and their academic language. And so thinking as far as intentionality, that comes through in the way that we group students together. It comes through in the way that we assign pairs or groups and how we combine those with various activity types. It's the way that we support students into entering those conversations as far as lowering their affective filters, providing them with the supports to sustain productive conversations. It's the way we as teacher model productive conversations and are explicit about what we're expecting our students' interactions with each other to look and sound like. And then, of course, being clear about what our expectations are when we do pass it over to those pairs and to those teams to interact. So all of this, what we hope is not the case, is that you're just hearing group work, because really it's about that intentionality. It's specific structured interactions and the supports that we as teachers embed throughout those to provide those students with the opportunity to engage meaningfully and really take ownership of both the content and the language.
Okay, so just take a minute, read this slide. We are all language learners. So no matter what language we speak and how proficient we are in that language, we are all constantly learning, and we are all language teachers. So every educator is teaching language at some level or another. So just keep that in mind as we go through this next activity that we're going to ask you all to participate in. We're going to show you a series of words, and these words have multiple meanings, and they are specific to computer science, but language learners might struggle with them as a result of their multiple meanings and their level of proficiency in language. So go to the next slide, Devin. All right, so when we say the word bit, what do you think could be interpreted by this word? And I'm going to ask you to waterfall into our chat what you think a student might interpret this word to mean. Bit. Give y'all a second. Megan, I see piece. Lisa says small amount, a little bit. Another couple seconds to come up with small. Okay. All right. All right, let's do our big reveal as to what bit is defined as. Right, the CS meaning. We'll come to that too. Devin, will you advance the slide? Here we go. So a lot of us thought, okay, small piece, a part, a quantity of something. But we know in our CS classes, right, we mean the smallest unit of computer memory, and it holds one of two possible values, that binary 0 or 1, and it comes from the phrase binary digit, so bit. All right, let's go to the next one. Argument. So again, I'll ask you to just waterfall into our chat argument what our students, our learners might think this means. Okay, so we have two people who disagree on a topic, a disagreement, a fight, a conflict, a heated exchange. All right, let's figure out what we mean when we say argument in computer science, when we're teaching. I mean, sometimes we actually mean argument because we know sometimes our students can tisk with each other. Let's see, an exchange of diverging or opposite views. But really, I think Kelly hit on this, a value that is passed into a command or a function. Yes. All right, let's look at the next one. What about bug? Take a minute. Insect gross. I like it. Or stop bugging me. Right. I like it. I hadn't really hit on that one. Insect. Good. Okay. A big reveal. To annoy or bother, or an insect of a large order distinguished by having mouth parts that are modified for piercing and sucking. Dang, I did not know that that was what a definition of bug was before we created these slides. The piercing and sucking is quite vivid. And then, but really what we mean, right, is a general term used to denote an unexpected error defect in the software. All right, let's see what our next one is. Array.
I forgot to take this stuff home and wash it.
Range.
And then yesterday.
A list. Multiplication, right, rows and columns. All right, let's have a reveal on this one. An impressive display or range. But of course, we're talking about a data structure that holds similar related data, and sometimes it can be two-dimensional, we know. All right, next. Okay, so what we had originally planned was to send you into breakout rooms and talk about some of that intentional planning within our students to converse with each other. Part of our identification in our lesson planning intentionality is identifying those barrier words, and the ones that we just went over, like bug, array, bit, those might be barrier words for your kids because automatically they're going to think of how they use it in social contexts, and it's not necessarily how we're meaning it in computer science. So basically, we're going to introduce you to one of our pair share structures called pairs and squares. And we're going to give you, and we're going to kind of just run through this in a different way rather than sending you into breakout rooms, which is what we're used to doing because our training is generally done in a Zoom setting. But I want you to quickly, on your own, just think of 2 minutes have 2 minutes to think of CS words that have different meanings or complex definitions. And if you have a piece of paper in front of you, you can jot them down, or else just kind of mentally think about it.
All right, Lauren, that's time. Do you want them to?
All right. So now what I'd like you to do, so normally what we would do with pairs and squares is we would pair students up and we've gradually released them. We've given them some time to have an idea of what we're talking about through our waterfall dump. And now we've asked them to create a list. And so what we would have them do is with an elbow partner, or if you're sitting in a square and you like to mix it up and do it diagonals or face partners, you would have them talk to each other and come up with the best selection of 5 words that they can. So if you have 5 words or 2 or 3, if you don't mind just dumping them for right now into the chat, because we can't pair you specifically with anybody to talk about this. But this part is really important, getting them time to come up with a list. So those that maybe only had 1 thing or 2 things on their list or 1 response would have a chance to think with another person about some other opportunities to add to their list, especially our English learners. So just dump your list, a max of 5 into the chat, just so we can have something to kind of talk about.
Put them there or what? And I said, you know what, then you move them just in case she just set them down and forgot about them and somebody takes it. I wasn't sure that's why.
I see Kelly added call. Okay, and then the last step would be 3 minutes to share out. So what I do in my classroom, and I think Devin does something very similar. We actually, I borrowed the idea from Devin. I had done it differently in the past, but she taught me this and it was awesome, is I have cards on my table that have, each table has like 1, 2, 3 scores, and then it has diamonds, a club, a spades, and a heart. If you are not supposed to use playing cards in your district, you can do other symbols that don't represent playing cards. And then I literally use a deck of playing cards to call on students and ask them to share out. So it's randomized. My pledge is going on behind me. So I am going to go ahead and mute and hand it off to Devin.
I'm going to take back over, and I'm just going to kind of quickly elaborate before we move on to kind of like, all of the other strategies. So this was one that, again, that we have demonstrated with our participants in virtual settings, but in the classroom, it kind of flows a little bit easier. But again, coming back to those 2 words that I used to kind of like set the tone: intentionality and authenticity. As far as intentionality goes, there's that individual think time. I have some colleagues that I work with that are always worried, like, well, those students that these supports are designed for, when are they being held accountable? And it's not so much that they need to be held accountable, it's that, I mean, yes, they do need to be held accountable, but it's that we need to provide them with that time to process on their own. So this differs from the like talk to a neighbor, where if the neighbor has the skills, they've jumped in and they've started answering the question or maybe kind of domineering the task before that student who needs the supports has had that individual time to process and come up with their own answer, even if it is just 1 word when we asked for multiple words, or even if it is just part of the solution, they've had that individual time to process. That's going to give them, that much needed, just like quiet think time. But then it's also going to kind of lower that affective filter and hopefully give them a little more confidence to speak up in that, second step where we're actually having them engage with a partner or within a team. And then your job as the teacher, kind of trying to just check, do I need to go faster? Are we ready to move on? Who needs support? Those share outs with your, if you've got random equity sticks or call cards, or like, again, Lauren and I use a deck of cards with corresponding ones on each student's table. There's different ways, but now you have a way to kind of just get the pulse of the room. So this pairs and squares, you'll see the pink sticker there. It's one of kind of 5 categories of strategies that we use in this whole program. So the pair share strategies, there's probably about a dozen that we actually walk through. Pairs and squares being one. There's lone wolf, there's paraphrase passport, there's lines of communication, and several others that are just kind of general structured student interactions that, again, just provide that intentionality when we're thinking about, like, how are we providing that individual think time, those supports to give that student who's struggling or who isn't comfortable with the language, giving those students the supports to feel like they can be vulnerable and share their answer. And so those pair share strategies kind of bleed into all of the other strategies. Sentence frames, which are very different than like a fill in the blank, like a sub worksheet where you're watching a video waiting for that one word that goes into that spot. Rather, a sentence frame for that last activity might have been, I think blank. And so it's just a very simple start, or kind of like crutch, I guess I'll say, for those students that just kind of need a little help getting out of the gate. And so those sentence frames can be very, very general, and are not designed to like give the student the answer, but rather, again, lower that affective filter and give the student the confidence that they need to just start practicing. Even incorrect answers are still going to be, important here for this student who's learning the language and learning the content. Prompt deconstruction, that's going to be anytime there is kind of a significant amount of text or even just a small amount of text that's a little dense. And so that's a strategy that we teach our participants of how to kind of teach the students how to jump in and start breaking down what is this problem actually asking. And for those of us that teach AP Computer Science principles, that is a specific strategy targeted towards the AP exam. And then our last two over to the right are the content specific. So I mentioned at the beginning that the program does really take in mind the computer science content and the computer science teachers' backgrounds. Coded commentary is kind of our twist on like annotation. And it's kind of like an infusion of sentence frames and annotation, where you're having a student who's been presented with, an entire program, maybe just a section of a program, but they're doing some sort of, direct response or direct kind of commenting to help them process what's actually happening in the code. And then finally, Bite, Write, Unite, which we just, couldn't stay away from a good pun. Bite, Write, Unite, because computer science classes tend to have a lot of like, or at least especially when you're first getting started, you can think back to like 10 years ago, when I myself didn't know the content. And so I was using a lot of the great videos that are out there. But it's not necessarily beneficial to show a student like a 5-minute video who, needs more breaks, needs more processing time to kind of digest that 5-minute video. And so Bite, Write, Unite is just a structured way to take a video or a piece of text, but we mostly use it for videos. And then we break it down into smaller, easier to digest bites. And so what that means is we might pause it about a minute in, or maybe 2 minutes in. That's kind of teacher discretion, is kind of what's a good size bite for your specific class. And then you give them a chance to write. And so that might be a specific prompt that you've given them. Maybe there was like one big takeaway they should have been listening for, or maybe it's just a general thought, but you're giving them time to write something down, and then time to check that with a partner or with a team. That's the Unite piece. So they kind of have a more systematic way of engaging with that video, rather than, hit play, hang out by your desk while all the students in your room try to follow along. And so that's one of the, 5 kind of category structures that we have, or strategies. Okay. Yes, thanks, Lauren, for adding that. It's a lot. I will say this is a 5-day summer workshop. So I apologize if we do have time at the end where I'll be able to stop for questions. I feel like we've kind of given you a lot here on this slide. But these 5 strategies, I hesitate there because the pair share strategies, there's like 12 within that category. But these 5 strategies are what we focus on for the summer intensive professional development. And then throughout the school year, we engage the participants in a lesson study cycle, multiple rounds of a lesson study cycle that are designed to support the sustained use of these strategies. So just checking in with participants, helping them find, because this can be a little daunting if they're all new strategies. When do I use the pink sticker versus when do I use the orange sticker versus when do I use the light blue sticker? And so we kind of help the participants get comfortable with what ingredients they like to use and when. Yeah.
And as Devin mentioned in the first when she was introducing this, is all of this is done very gradually. So we have a common slogan in our program that says, go slow to go fast. So you go slow and you start with really low stakes kind of activities to do all of these with, maybe no computer science content at all. And then as the students get more and more used to the activities, the strategies, and are better at understanding what you mean when you say think, write, pair, share, consensus, then you can start adding in that computer science content or that higher level language requirement for them. So gradual release of students. We do a lot of I do, we do, you do as well, so that the students feel very comfortable with everything that we're talking about before we release them into the world of computer science content as well.
Yeah, that's one of the things that might not be explicitly here in the CSforEL package. But you really, as a teacher, have to teach the strategies before you can expect them to succeed. And so that intentionality with the way that you introduce, all right, good morning, class. Today we're going to be doing coded commentary. What does that first launch of that strategy look like? Because if it flops on the first try, a lot of times those teachers won't give it a second try. But it's really unpacking what needs to happen, as you teach a strategy, and then watching what that strategy can do over time when you get to just, pull it out and the students know how to respond when you say, lone wolf, wolf pack, or whatever the strategy name might be. Okay, so how do we do that? I keep talking about this intentionality and kind of the way that we support those participants for sustained use of these strategies. Because when we think about the vocabulary activity that Lauren just guided us through, academic language goes beyond just vocabulary words. When we're having them engage in a conversation, or when we're having them write a comment in a section of code, or when we're having them watch, process, and then respond to a video, there's a lot more language demands embedded in each of those activities than a vocabulary word, or than a word wall can maybe support with. I'm not saying that word balls aren't great, but there's, what next? So we walk our participants through this lesson planning algorithm, which has been really fun. Just like on a personal note, Lauren and I, when we said, we went through as cohort A, this didn't exist in this format. And so it's kind of evolved. There's a separate team of facilitators. I believe there's 6 of us total right now who facilitate the workshops and just kind of brainstorm how to keep it meaningful and keep it, relevant for those participants. So it's been nice to see that evolution, because we're listening. We want feedback, and we want to make sure that this, stands in the classroom. So the lesson planning algorithm, for time's sake, I can't go through every single step, but I'm going to give you, I'm going to walk you through every single step, but we're not going to be able to model every single one. Step 1 is to highlight the objective. So you're looking at your lesson plan and you're just going to kind of figure out, okay, what exactly is this lesson designed to hit on? And then we ask them to star any language objectives. So maybe that language objective says explain the difference between, these types of variables. So that explain objective, there's inherently vocabulary needed and language demands needed. And so if there's not an explicit language objective, we do ask them to write one, because again, anytime we're asking them to, engage in our classrooms, their language is embedded. And then number 2, we actually have them jump all the way to the end to highlight the closure activity. Just making sure the objective and then kind of how we conclude are appropriately matched. And then step 3, 4, and 5 kind of work like a cycle. So you might do these 3, 4, 5 steps a couple times throughout your lesson. And it's this idea of, where am I going to pause and process? Those are the little puppy dog paw stickers. So our participants actually have access to these physical stickers. And so they're, I'm going to pause here. And then what's the prompt that I'm going to ask students? What vocabulary would they need? And then those strategy stickers come in when they start getting comfortable with, like I said, which ingredients are they going to use to cook? So maybe this, this pause is going to be best suited by a pair share structure and some sentence frames. And then they keep going, same thing. Oh, here's a spot in the lesson where I need to pause. Here's what I'm going to have students do. They're going to engage in a bite, write, unite. And, so it's just kind of this intentional way of looking at sentence patterns, ideal responses, and that sort of, unpacking all of that. And finally, like Lauren mentioned, boxing barrier words, because even all through steps 1 through 5, we don't catch every single tricky word, because there's lots of tricky words that are not computer science words or are not, content, like they're not novel. So maybe it's something that came up in the specific example for how you're introducing conditionals, but the word itself doesn't have anything to do with programming. So there's just some miscellaneous words that will sometimes pop up that you can start to anticipate. So we call those barrier words. Okay. Yes, thank you, Kelly. Thank you for all of your great ideas there in the chat. So what we're going to do is just kind of walk you guys through step 1 and step 2 to just kind of give you a glimpse at like the goals of the lesson planning algorithm. Step 1, again, we're going to highlight the objective. So here, this is a code.org lesson where students are like starting to poke around some code that has variables being introduced. So if you're familiar, great. If not, don't worry about it. So the teachers would have, whatever, and it's our program is curriculum agnostic. So you don't have to use code.org or whatever curriculum you use. We support you through the lesson planning algorithm. It's designed to work with any curriculum. So the objectives here, so it says explain the purpose, identify common programming patterns, modify apps. I'm seeing this one up here, explaining the purpose of these programming patterns. That sounds like the students are going to have a specific language objective when they're trying to meet that one. So just kind of placing a star there to draw extra attention to those language demands for the lesson. And then step 2, we jump right down to our check for understanding. So if this language objective that I'm looking at is asking students to explain these different programming patterns that they're seeing with variables, specifically it's like the counting pattern. If you're familiar with that, in computer science, in order to increase a variable, you take the variable name, you add whatever increment you desire, and then you use that assignment statement. So it might say like counter equals counter plus 1, or score equals score plus 1. And so that's kind of what the students are kind of trying to grapple with here.
Oh, we're going to do that?
Step 2, the students' closure activity would be this final question: explain in your own words the process of creating and updating a variable. Okay, so I've got these step 1, step 2 pieces. When I'm looking at a prompt, so I'm asking students, explain in your own words the process of creating and updating a variable. This is something that I am so guilty of prior to this program, and it's never writing down an actual answer key, or an exemplar response, because I'm like, oh, it's up here. I know how I'd answer that. But the problem is then when you go to grade these, what did that actually look like, right? So what did you have in mind? And we know we can read through 10 and kind of start to calibrate, okay, this one, good, okay, needs work. But also when we're then asking this of our students in real time, what benefits could having that ideal response provide if we know the appropriate supports, right? And so looking here, again, the prompt being explain in your own words the process of creating and updating a variable. My ideal response, if I actually sit down when I'm lesson planning and make myself write this, which I've gotten a lot better with, might sound something like this. Okay, so my ideal response: first, create a variable by using the keyword var, then give the variable a name. Then update a variable by using the variable name and the equal sign. And now some of you guys might even be sitting there at your screens and being like, well, I might say this, or in my classroom, I encourage them to use this structure when they're writing their responses. Great. That's what we're hoping for you to like realize, is that there's patterns here in the way that we expect them to write their responses. And those patterns can be sentence frames, or those patterns can be shared with the students to support them, because this first then pattern in the work that we're asking our students to do pops up a lot. So for example, I might give them these sentence frames. If this is my ideal response, I might provide these sentence frames. First create a variable by, then update a variable by, and then see what they do with that. This way I'm able to actually focus on the new thing that they were learning, which is like, the counter pattern or the increment pattern. If your ideal responses, or if your class is, ready, you might even par these down a little bit more. Maybe the sentence frames that you're giving students are just first you blank, then you blank. And if you are a classroom teacher, I encourage you to try this, pick a day next week and just give them something really simple, and then just watch what happens, because it feels silly sometimes to talk about like a sentence frame that's 2 words, but it really does kind of give some of those students, specifically our English learners, the boost that they need to just kind of start telling us what they're thinking. And then last, and I know we're running out of time, I'm almost done. So you might start to generalize, and then that's when you might have just sentence frames that are available on the board to students all year round.
So I just was going to add, as I go through the year, I add a bank of sentence frames to my board, and then I ask them to choose their own as I gradually release them into the world of pair share structures. And you'll find that this, in order to blank, you need to blank, is so applicable in so many other areas than just this specific question. And so your bank becomes these really generalized frames that add those supports for them, but really you're not giving them much. You're not giving them, it's not a fill in the blank, because they have to fill in a lot of concept here and here. So, but it really provides that support, and it, especially for our English learners that just need a jumping off point to start practicing their language.
Okay, so with that in mind, this was like a really, really fast introduction to just step 1 and step 2, to kind of show you guys what we mean when we say intentionality. And also to show you what we mean when Lauren said, go slow to go fast, because this takes a long time for teachers to do. And this is not maybe like a daily strategy that they're using. We like to think that they are, but if it's not, but eventually they do get faster at finding those, those response patterns and finding the value in all of the steps of our lesson planning algorithm. Which again has a lot more, but we are out of time. And so I'm just making sure I didn't miss anything super important here. So again, as we work with our participants to connect that ideal response, it then ties back into all of those strategies that we're using along the way. But I wanted to leave at least a couple minutes for questions, because I know we saw some people in the chat who were already, who already had some. So, like I said, my name is Devin Morano. My fabulous co-presenter Lauren is also available for questions, but I have designated time in my day to kind of talk to people about the program. So that's why my contact information is here. If you are interested, we are working on our our interest list for the 25-26 school year, for future cohorts. So definitely reach out if that applies to you or your district, or whatever, workspace you're currently influencing. And then I'll take a break also, because I know that there might be some questions in the chat. Oh, I see. Kelly asked, I'm wondering if you have any resources that differentiate support. So the idea, okay, does a teacher have to teach APCS? No, we've had participants who've joined the program who do not teach AP Computer Science principles. Our emphasis on APCSP is due to like the grant that we're tied to, but you should absolutely still reach out if you're interested, regardless of which CS courses you teach. And then Kelly's question. So we don't, again, because our focus is like APCSP, we don't have a lot as far as like newcomer resources. But as far as like, so in California, we have like STEL, LTEL, and then RFEP, so like reclassified. So there are some, proficiency level differentiations that we talk about in the program, because all of our strategies kind of, in my mind, they're very spectrumy, right? And so kind of which one you're picking, how big of a sentence frame are you giving the students versus how much have you pulled back? And so I think there's a lot that the teachers come to realize throughout that lesson planning algorithm, that they start to make those connections about, which strategies are best serving which proficiency level, and kind of how to serve all of them at once. So.
And I also think that you can gradually release students in different ways. So you can say, I want this group of students to try this, or you can offer the sentence frame and challenge students to step away from it if you feel like some of them don't need it. But also, I have found that the sentence frames are great for our high achievers who already have that English proficiency as well, because it just gets them to start to focus their writing, which they have to do for those new FRQs for the PT Create. So, and specifically talking about AP Computer Science principles. And so I think it helps no matter what level they're on to provide these frames. But then again, you can kind of challenge them to step back from them as well.
Okay, awesome. Well, we so appreciate your time and popping into our session. This is actually like an 80-hour PD program that you just got a crash course in. We hope you're able to take some pieces back to your respective workspaces. And we look forward to hearing from some of you guys and working with you in the future.